Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Man Behind the Walls. Milton Wells stood in the garage of his modest colonial-style home in suburban Connecticut, running his calloused fingers along the mahogany workbench he'd built 40 years ago. At 68, he still had the broad shoulders of the construction foreman he'd been for 3 decades, though his dark hair had surrendered entirely to silver. The workshop smelled of sawdust and motor oil, honest smells that reminded him of simpler times. "Dad, you in there?" Milton looked up to see his son Randy at the door, looking uncomfortable in a pressed polo shirt that probably cost more than Milton spent on clothes in a month. At 34, Randy had his mother's soft features and nervous energy, so different from the quiet strength Milton had tried to instill in him. "Just finishing up this chair for the Hendersons," Milton said, gesturing to a handcrafted rocking chair in the corner. "What brings you by on a Wednesday?" Randy shifted his weight. "Melissa wanted me to talk to you about Thanksgiving." Milton's jaw tightened at the mention of his daughter-in-law. Melissa Clayton had waltzed into Randy's life 5 years ago, all platinum hair and practice miles, and married him within 6 months. She came from old money in Greenwich, the kind that looked down on people who worked with their hands. "What about it?" She's been planning this big dinner. 30 people. Her family, some business associates of mine, the whole thing. Randy wouldn't meet his eyes. "And she thinks maybe you'd be more comfortable eating in the kitchen. So you don't feel out of place with all the fancy conversation." The sandpaper Milton had been holding crumpled in his grip. "Your wife wants me to eat in the kitchen. In my own son's house." "It's not like that, Dad. She just thinks I'm an embarrassment." Milton set the sandpaper down carefully, his voice leveled despite the anger simmering beneath. "Because I built houses instead of empires. Because I say sometimes and don't know which fork to use for the salad." Randy's face flushed. "That's not fair. Melissa's under a lot of stress. This dinner is important for my career. Her father's bringing potential investors and God forbid they see you came from working-class stock," Milton finished. He studied his son's face, seeing the weak capitulation there, and something inside him hardened. "Tell Melissa I'll be there, at the main table. And if she has a problem with that, she can uninvite me properly instead of sending you to do her dirty work." After Randy left, Milton sat alone in the garage for a long time. The thing about building things for 40 years was that you learn patience. You learn to read blueprints, to see how pieces fit together, to anticipate problems before they arose. You also learned that some foundations were rotten from the start, no matter how pretty the facade. His late wife, Dorothy, had seen through Melissa immediately. On her deathbed 2 years ago, she'd gripped Milton's hand and whispered, "Don't let that woman destroy our boy. Promise me." Milton had promised, and Milton Wells never broke a promise. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 15 years. "Jack Reed speaking." "Jack, it's Milton. I need a favor." Chapter 2. The Perfect Facade. The house Randy and Melissa lived in was a monument to excess. A 6,000-square-foot McMansion in the expensive part of Fairfield County, all white columns and marble everything. Milton had helped with the down payment, a fact Melissa conveniently forgot whenever she introduced Randy as a self-made entrepreneur. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Milton arrived for what Melissa called a planning meeting. He found her in the kitchen, barking orders at 2 hired caterers while consulting a binder thick enough to be a doctoral thesis. "Milton," she said without looking up, her voice honeyed poison. "So glad you could make it. We need to discuss the seating arrangements." At 31, Melissa Clayton Wells was beautiful in the way of a porcelain doll, perfect and utterly cold. Her blonde hair was always styled, her nails always manicured, her designer clothes always immaculate. She'd never worked a day in her life, having gone from her father's mansion to Randy's on a path paved with credit cards and entitlement. "Where's Randy?" Milton asked. "At the office. Some crisis with the quarterly reports." She dismissed the caterers with a wave. "Now, I've seated you between Aunt Pearl and my cousin Tracy. They're quite chatty, so you won't have to worry about contributing much to the conversation." Milton noticed the seating chart. He was at the far end of the table, as far from Melissa and her father as possible, sandwiched between two women he'd never met. "That's thoughtful," he said mildly. Melissa's eyes narrowed, searching for sarcasm, but Milton's face was impassive. He'd learned long ago that the best way to deal with people like her was to give them nothing to grab onto. "I also wanted to discuss your attire," she continued. "I've arranged for a suit to be delivered to your house. Nothing too expensive. I know you're not comfortable with extravagance, but something appropriate for the occasion." "I have a suit." "Yes, I've seen it." Her lip curled. "It's from the 80s, Milton. This dinner is important. Randy's entire future could hinge on the impressions we make." What she meant was, "You're an embarrassment, and I need you dressed appropriately to minimize the damage." Milton nodded slowly. "I'll wear the suit you send." After he left, he sat in his truck for a moment, watching through the window as Melissa pulled out her phone. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see her face, animated, laughing, almost giddy. She paced the kitchen like a woman plotting something delightful. Milton had seen that expression before, on the face of a contractor who tried to scam him out of $50,000 on a mall renovation. That contractor was now serving 8 years for fraud. He drove to a small office building in New Haven, where Jack Reed worked as a private investigator. Jack had been on Milton's crew 20 years ago before a back injury ended his construction career. Milton had helped him get licensed as a PI, paid for his training, and never asked for anything in return. Until now. Jack's office was cramped and cluttered, walls covered with photos and bulletin boards. At 55, Jack had the lean, hungry look of a man who missed nothing. "I got your package," Jack said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "You were right to be suspicious." Milton opened the folder. Inside were photos. Melissa at expensive restaurants with a man who wasn't Randy. Melissa entering a luxury apartment building in Manhattan. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals of thousands of dollars. "Who's the man?" Milton asked. "Vince Willard, high-end divorce attorney. Specializes in asset protection for wealthy women." Jack lit a cigarette, ignoring the no-smoking sign. "Your daughter-in-law's been seeing him for 6 months. Very discreet, very expensive. She's planning to divorce Randy. More than that." Jack pulled out another document. "I've got a source at her father's law firm. Melissa's been moving assets around, setting up trusts, creating paper trails that make it look like Randy's been embezzling from his own company. When she pulls the trigger, she's going to take everything, the house, the business, Randy's reputation. She'll paint him as an abusive, unstable fraudster." Milton's hands clenched. "And my son has no idea. She's been playing him like a fiddle. The sad thing is, I found evidence she's been doing this from the beginning. She targeted him specifically because his business was growing and you'd help finance it. She researched you both before she ever accidentally met Randy at that charity gala." A cold fury settled over Milton. This wasn't just about destroying Randy financially. It was about destroying everything Milton had built, everything he'd given his son. "What about Thanksgiving?" Milton asked. Jack hesitated. "That's the weird part. She's been talking to Willard about making a statement at Thanksgiving. Something about maximum impact, witnesses, setting the stage for the divorce filing. I couldn't get details, but it sounds like she's planning some kind of public humiliation." Milton stood, sliding the folder into his jacket. "Thank you, Jack. Send me your invoice." "Milton, what are you going to do?" Milton paused at the door. "I'm going to Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it." Chapter 3. The Feast of Fools. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn chill that made Milton think of Dorothy. She'd loved this holiday, the cooking, the family gathered together, the gratitude. He touched her photo on the mantle, running his thumb over her smile. "Watch this, Dottie," he whispered. "I'm about to keep my promise." He dressed carefully in the suit Melissa had sent, an expensive Italian number that fit surprisingly well. In his pocket, he carried his phone and a small digital recorder. In his truck, he had something else entirely. The house was already bustling when he arrived at 3 o'clock. Cars lined the circular driveway. Mercedes, BMWs, a Bentley that probably belonged to Melissa's father. Through the windows, Milton could see people in cocktail attire, champagne glasses glinting. Melissa answered the door in a white designer dress, her smile sharp as glass. "Milton, don't you look handsome? Come in, come in." The house had been transformed into something from a magazine spread. The dining room table stretched impossibly long, set with china that probably cost more than Milton's truck. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled guests. 30 people in total, just as advertised. Milton recognized some faces. Melissa's father, Calvin Clayton, a silver-haired corporate lawyer with shark eyes. Her mother, Hope Clayton, dripping in diamonds and disdain. Melissa's cousin Tracy Cooley, a social media influencer who'd never had an original thought. Various business associates, society friends, people who measured worth in stock portfolios. And Randy, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo, his eyes pleading with Milton to just go along, to not make waves. "Everyone," Melissa announced, her voice carrying across the murmur of conversation, "my father-in-law has arrived. Milton, why don't you take your seat?" She guided him to the far end of the table, where Pearl Scott and Tracy waited. Both women looked at him with the polite disinterest reserved for the help. The dinner began with all the ritual of a coronation. Calvin Clayton said grace, a perfunctory nod to tradition before the real business of showing off began. Courses appeared like clockwork: lobster bisque, duck confit, wagyu beef. Wine flowed freely. Milton ate quietly, listening to the conversations around him. Tracy prattled about her latest sponsorship deal. Pearl gossiped about neighbors Milton had never met. At the other end of the table, Melissa held court, laughing and charming, her hand occasionally resting on Randy's arm in a performance of marital bliss. It was during the main course that Milton noticed a shift. Melissa's eyes kept flicking to him, a predatory gleam building. She leaned over to whisper something to her father, who smiled coldly. Then she stood, tapping her wine glass with a fork. "Everyone, I have a special announcement." The table quieted. Randy looked confused. "I wanted to thank you all for coming today," Melissa continued, her voice syrupy. "It means so much to have family and friends gathered together. Especially you, Milton. I know this isn't your usual environment." A few polite chuckles. Milton remained still. "In fact, I've prepared something special for you. A more appropriate dish, shall we say?" She snapped her fingers, and one of the caterers appeared carrying a bowl. "After all, we should all eat what we deserve." The bowl was placed in front of Milton. It was dog food, the kind that came in chunks with gravy. The smell wafted up, unmistakable. The table went silent. Shock registered on faces. Even Calvin Clayton looked taken aback. Melissa's smile was triumphant, cruel. "Eat this, you old mutt. It's all you deserve." She expected him to explode, to make a scene, to give her the excuse she needed to paint him as unstable and unhinged in front of 30 witnesses. That was the plan: humiliate him publicly, provoke a reaction, document it for the divorce proceedings. But Milton had built buildings for 40 years. He knew how to stay calm when the foundation shook. He pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Now," he said simply. Then he looked up at Melissa, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Enjoy your last Thanksgiving here." Melissa's smile faltered. "What are you?" The doorbell rang, and rang again, and again. Through the windows, Milton could see cars pulling up. Lots of cars. The first person through the door was Jack Reed, carrying a briefcase. Behind him came 2 police officers Milton recognized from the construction of the new precinct building. Melissa Clayton Wells, one of the officers, said, "We have some questions about financial fraud and identity theft." Melissa's face went white. "This is ridiculous." "I haven't. We also have a warrant to search the premises," the officer continued, "related to an ongoing investigation into conspiracy to commit fraud." Behind the police, more people entered. Randy's business partner, looking grim, an IRS agent, and finally, stepping through with the quiet authority of a man who owned half the town, Judge Albert McCoy, who'd been Dorothy's cousin and had been looking for a reason to take down Calvin Clayton's crooked legal empire for years. Milton stood, his voice calm and clear. 2 months ago, my friend Jack began investigating my daughter-in-law. What he found was a pattern of fraud going back years. Melissa, You've been setting up my son to take the fall for embezzlement that you committed. You've been moving money, creating false documents, all while planning to divorce him and destroy his reputation. That's insane, Melissa shrieked, but her eyes darted to the door like a trapped animal. The thing is, Milton continued, when Jack found evidence of your affair with Vince Willard and your plans to frame Randy, I did what I've always done. I built a better foundation. He nodded to Jack, who opened the briefcase. We have recordings, Jack said, spreading documents across the table. Melissa discussing the frame-up with Willard. We have bank records showing she's been systematically draining Randy's company accounts. We have emails between her and her father about manipulating the business to tank its value before the divorce. Calvin Clayton stood abruptly. This is entrapment. No, Judge McCoy interrupted, his voice cold. This is justice. And Calvin, we both know your firm has been under investigation for ethics violations. Having your daughter caught in a fraud conspiracy isn't going to help that situation. The room erupted in chaos. Guests scrambled for exits. Hope Clayton burst into tears. Tracy fumbled with her phone, probably trying to figure out how to spin this for her followers. And Randy just stared at Melissa with dawning horror. You are going to destroy me, he whispered. Melissa's mask finally cracked. You were nothing when I met you. Just another middle-class nobody with a small business. I made you relevant. I made you. You made him a target, Milton said quietly. And you forgot one thing. What's that? I taught my son to build things. But I also taught him that sometimes you have to tear down what's rotten before you can build something strong. He looked at Randy. Son, it's time to decide. Are you going to keep living in her house of cards? Or are you going to help me clean up this mess? Randy stood slowly, walked past Melissa without a word, and came to stand beside his father. That's when Milton smiled, a cold, satisfied smile. Officers, she's all yours. As the police led a hysterical Melissa away, Milton looked around at the ruins of her perfect Thanksgiving. The expensive china, the untouched food, the scattered guests fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. He picked up the bowl of dog food and walked to the kitchen, dumping it in the garbage. Then he returned to the dining room, where Randy stood, looking lost. Come on, son, Milton said. Let's go to my house. I got a turkey in the oven and real family waiting. As they walked out, Milton glanced back once. Through the window, he could see Melissa in the back of the police car, her perfect facade finally, irreparably shattered. Dorothy would have approved. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Revelations. The morning after Thanksgiving, Milton's kitchen table was covered in legal documents, coffee cups, and the remnants of leftover turkey sandwiches. Randy sat across from him, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. Jack Reed occupied the third chair, his laptop open to a spreadsheet that detailed the full extent of Melissa's schemes. I need you to understand the scope of this, Jack said, turning the laptop toward Randy. This wasn't impulsive. She's been planning it for at least 3 years, probably from the moment she realized your business was growing faster than expected. Randy's hands trembled as he scrolled through the files. She took $200,000 from the company accounts. Closer to 300, Jack corrected, but she did it in small increments, buried in legitimate expenses, routed through shell companies her father helped her set up. If you try to fight the divorce on your own, you'd have looked like the criminal. How did you catch her? Randy asked his father. Milton leaned back in his chair, remembering that first moment of suspicion 6 months ago. It was small things. The way she'd steer you away from certain financial discussions. How she'd always volunteer to handle the company bookkeeping even though you had an accountant. But what really got my attention was when she tried to get you to sign those life insurance documents. The ones where I made her the sole beneficiary with a $5 million payout. Milton's jaw tightened. Your mother warned me about Melissa from the start. Said there was something calculating in her eyes. I thought Dorothy was just being protective, but she'd always been a better judge of character than me. Jack interjected. Once Milton hired me, I started following the money. That led to Vince Willard, the divorce attorney. Willard's office was sloppy. They used a shared server that my contact was able to access. We found the whole playbook, when she'd file for divorce, how she'd claim abuse to get an emergency restraining order, the media strategy to destroy your reputation. Randy put his head in his hands. I loved her. I really thought. She's a predator, Milton said flatly. Some people are. You can't blame yourself for that. A knock at the door interrupted them. Milton opened it to find Albert McCoy, the judge, holding a thick folder and looking tired despite the early hour. Milton, Randy, Albert nodded. I thought you'd want to know the latest. They gathered around the table as Albert spread out new documents. Melissa made bail this morning. Her father posted it. But the DA is building a strong case. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud. Calvin Clayton is also in hot water. His law firm was already under investigation for ethics violations, and this has accelerated things. What about Randy? Milton asked. Can they still try to pin this on him? Albert shook his head. Jack's evidence is ironclad. The recordings, the bank records, the emails, they all clearly show Melissa as the architect of the fraud. Randy's in the clear legally, though the business will take a hit from the publicity. Randy finally spoke, his voice hollow. What happens now? Now you divorce her, Albert said. Get a good attorney. I can recommend several. Document everything. And prepare for her to fight dirty. Women like Melissa don't go down easy. After Albert left, Randy stood and walked to the window, staring out at the barren November trees. Dad, I need to ask you something. Shoot, how did you know to start investigating? What was the exact moment you knew something was wrong? Milton thought back to 6 months ago, to the conversation that had started everything. You came to me asking to borrow money. Said the business had a cash flow problem, just temporary. I looked at your books, and they didn't add up. Revenue was strong, expenses were normal, but somehow you were short on operating capital. That's when I knew someone was skimming. Why didn't you tell me then? Because I needed proof, and I needed to know how deep it went. Milton joined his son at the window. Randy, I'm going to be honest with you. I failed you when you married Melissa. I should have spoken up, should have made you see what she was. Instead, I kept quiet because I thought it was your decision to make. It was my decision, but you're my son, and a father's job doesn't end when his kid turns 18. I should have protected you better. Randy turned, and for the first time that morning, his eyes were clear. You did protect me, Dad. You saved my entire life. I just wish I'd listened to you and Mom from the beginning. They stood together in silence, the weight of the past year settling between them. Finally, Jack cleared his throat. I hate to interrupt this moment, but there's something else you both need to see. He pulled up a new file on his laptop. While I was investigating Melissa, I found something unexpected. She's not working alone. Milton leaned forward. What do you mean? There's another woman. Someone she's been coordinating with, sharing strategies. They met in some kind of online forum for women planning divorces. Melissa wasn't just running a scam on Randy. She was part of a larger network. Randy's face went pale. How large? At least a dozen women, all targeting successful men, all using the same playbook. Frame them for financial crimes, destroy their reputations, take everything in the divorce. It's systematic. Milton felt the anger rising again, cold and controlled. Who else is in this network? Jack clicked through several profiles. Most of them I don't recognize, but there's one you might. He turned the screen, showing a photo of a woman in her early 30s, attractive, well-dressed, with calculating eyes. That's Tracy Cooley, Randy said. Melissa's cousin. She was at Thanksgiving. Jack confirmed. And according to the forum posts, she's currently targeting a real estate developer named Shane McDowell. Engaged to him, planning the same strategy as Melissa used on you. Milton remembered Tracy from the dinner, the vapid influencer who'd barely acknowledged his existence. Apparently, that was all an act. We need to warn this McDowell, Randy said. Already done, Jack replied. I reached out to him yesterday. He didn't believe me at first, but when I showed him the evidence, he started his own investigation. Turns out Tracy's been moving money around too. Milton processed this new information. What had started as protecting his son had uncovered something larger, a coordinated effort to defraud men across the state, maybe further. Jack, I need you to dig deeper into this network. Find out who else is involved, who's running it, how widespread it is. Already on it. But Milton, this is bigger than just helping Randy. If we expose this whole operation, you're going to make powerful enemies. These women are connected to wealthy families, influential people. Good, Milton said coldly. Let them come. Chapter 5. The plan unfolds. A week after Thanksgiving, Milton sat in the office of Hal Tanner, one of the state's most aggressive divorce attorneys. Hal was in his 50s, with the sharp features of a man who'd made his career crushing opposing counsel in court. Your son's case is strong, Hal said, reviewing the documents Jack had provided. Melissa's fraud is well documented, and with the criminal charges pending, she'll have a hard time claiming she's the victim. We'll file for divorce on Randy's behalf, cite irreconcilable differences in fraud, and push for a complete dissolution with no alimony. What about the house? Randy asked. You bought it with money your father loaned you, correct? When Randy nodded, Hal continued. Then we argue it's a family asset, not marital property. Melissa gets nothing. Milton watched his son absorb this, seeing the steel slowly return to his spine. Randy had been broken by Melissa's betrayal, but he wasn't destroyed. The boy, no, the man, was starting to fight back. There's one more thing, Milton said. He pulled out a folder containing Jack's research on the fraud network. We want to go after all of them. Hal's eyebrows rose as he reviewed the files. This is ambitious. You're talking about exposing a criminal conspiracy that involves some very wealthy, very connected families. Can it be done? Legally? Yes. Practically? It'll be a war. These people will use every resource they have to shut you down, discredit you, maybe even come after you personally. Milton thought of Dorothy, of the promise he'd made. I didn't raise my son to back down from bullies. And I'm not about to start now. Hal smiled, a predatory expression. Then let's burn it all down. The strategy they developed was multi-pronged. First, Randy would file for divorce with maximum publicity, making sure the fraud charges were front and center. Second, Jack would continue investigating the other women in the network, gathering evidence. Third, they'd reach out to the other men being targeted, building a coalition. This Shane McDowell, Hal said, the one engaged to Tracy Cooley. He's a wealthy developer with serious resources. If we can get him on board, he can help fund the investigation. Milton called Shane that afternoon. The man answered on the second ring, his voice guarded. Mr. Wells, call me Milton. I understand Jack Reed reached out to you about your fiancée. A long pause. He did. I've been doing my own investigating since then. He was right. Tracy's been moving money, creating false documents. I confronted her last night, and she denied everything at first. Then, when I showed her the evidence, she threatened me. Said she'd claim I abused her, that I'd forced her to steal to escape me. She had photos ready, bruises she'd apparently given herself, a whole story prepared. Milton's grip tightened on the phone. These women are professionals, Shane. They've been doing this for years, helping each other perfect the technique. Jack mentioned there's a network. How many others are there? At least a dozen we know of. Probably more. They operate through online forums, share strategies, provide alibis for each other. It's organized crime dressed up in designer clothes. Shane was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? Resources. Money for investigators, lawyers, media, if it comes to that. And your testimony about Tracy's threats. We're building a case against all of them, but we need to move fast before they scatter. You have it. All of it. These women destroyed my trust, try to rob me blind. I want them exposed. That evening, Milton gathered his war council at his house. Randy, Jack, Hal, and now Shane McDowell, who'd driven up from Stanford. Shane was in his 40s, built like a linebacker, with the kind of quiet intensity that came from building a business from nothing. Gentlemen, Milton began, we're about to start something that's going to get ugly. These women and their families have money, connections, and no moral compass. They will lie, cheat, and destroy to protect themselves. So how do we fight them? Shane asked. Jack pulled up his laptop. We've identified 13 women in the network so far. They communicate through an encrypted forum called Phoenix Rising, which positions itself as a support group for women in bad marriages. In reality, it's a school for fraud. He clicked through screenshots. They share techniques, how to fake abuse, where to hide money, which lawyers and judges are sympathetic to women's claims, how to use social media to destroy a man's reputation. Some of them have successfully executed this scheme multiple times. Multiple times? Randy looked sick. Melissa wasn't a first-time offender, Jack confirmed. She was married briefly in her early 20s to a businessman in Boston. That marriage ended in divorce. He was accused of financial impropriety, and she walked away with a settlement. No criminal charges were filed because he didn't have someone like your father watching his back. Shane leaned forward. Who runs this network? That's the interesting part, Jack said. The forum has a moderator who goes by Athena. She's the one who vets new members, provides strategic advice, and apparently coordinates the larger operations. We don't know her real identity yet, but based on her posts, she's experienced, educated, and completely ruthless. Milton studied the screen. Finding Athena is the key. She's the architect. Take her down, and the whole thing collapses. There's a problem, Hal interjected. Most of what we have is evidence of conspiracy and fraud in civil matters. Criminal charges are harder to prove and prosecute. We need something bigger, something that will guarantee serious jail time for the ringleaders. Shane cleared his throat. What if I told you Tracy mentioned something about their insurance policy? She said it during our confrontation, then caught herself and shut up. Everyone turned to look at him. What kind of insurance policy? Milton asked. I don't know exactly, but from the context, it sounded like something they used to guarantee compliance or silence. Something serious enough that she went pale when she realized she'd mentioned it. Jack was already typing. I'll dig into that. If there's blackmail or coercion involved, that changes everything. The meeting continued late into the night, strategies forming and reforming. By the time everyone left, they had a plan: expose the network publicly, build criminal cases against the key players, and find this mysterious Athena. But as Milton locked up his house that night, he felt the weight of what they'd started. This wasn't just about Randy anymore. This was about stopping a predatory operation that had destroyed dozens of lives. He thought of Dorothy again, of her fierce protection of family. She'd always said that evil flourished when good people stayed silent. Milton Wells had been silent long enough. Chapter 6, The Web Titans. The divorce filing made the local news within 24 hours. Randy Wells versus Melissa Clayton Wells, with allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The story had everything reporters loved: wealth, betrayal, criminal charges. Melissa's response was predictable. She called a press conference, standing beside her father, Calvin Clayton, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. My husband and his father have fabricated these charges to avoid their own criminal liability, she sobbed into the microphones. Randy has been stealing from his own company for years, and now that I discovered it, they're trying to destroy me. The performance was Oscar-worthy. Calvin stood beside her, projecting fatherly concern and legal gravitas. We will be filing countercharges, he announced, including defamation, harassment, and false accusation. The Wells family will regret this persecution of my daughter. Milton watched the press conference from his living room, Jack beside him. She's good, Jack admitted. If we didn't have the evidence, I'd almost believe her. The public will believe her, Milton said. For now. Beautiful woman, tears, rich lawyer father standing beside her. We look like the villains. So what do we do? Milton smiled. We let her think she's winning. And we keep digging. Jack had been working around the clock to identify Athena. The forum used sophisticated encryption, routing through multiple proxy servers, but Jack had connections in the cybersecurity world. One of them, a former hacker turned consultant named Gustavo Boyd, had agreed to help. The thing about criminals, Gustavo explained via video call, is that they get cocky. They think encryption makes them invisible, so they get sloppy in other ways. What kind of sloppy? Milton asked. Cross-referencing. Athena mentions specific legal cases in her posts, uses certain phrases, references events that narrow down her identity. I'm building a profile. He pulled up a document. Based on her posts, I can tell you she's probably a lawyer, late 30s to mid-40s, has experience in both criminal and civil law, and has connections to family courts in Connecticut and New York. Randy, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. Could she be a judge? Everyone stopped. That would make sense, Hal said slowly. A family court judge would have access to case files, inside knowledge of how this system works, connections to lawyers and social workers. She could manipulate cases, provide advice to the network members, maybe even rule in their favor. Jack was already searching. There are 47 family court judges in Connecticut. 11 of them are women in the right age range. We start there. While Jack worked on identifying Athena, Shane McDowell was handling Tracy Cooley. He'd broken off their engagement publicly, citing her criminal activity. Tracy's response was to file a restraining order, claiming Shane had threatened and abused her. She's using the same playbook, Shane told Milton over the phone. Fake bruises, manufactured text messages that make me look violent. If I didn't have documentation of everything, I'd be in jail right now. How are you holding up? Angry, but focused. I want these women stopped, Milton. Not just for me, but for the next guy they target. The investigation revealed more victims. Jack found 3 other men who'd been divorced under suspicious circumstances, all involving fraud allegations that were later dropped, all ending with the ex-wives walking away with substantial settlements. One of them, John Simpson, agreed to meet with Milton. John was a software entrepreneur who'd lost his company and his reputation to his ex-wife, Candace Church, another member of the Phoenix Rising Forum. She destroyed me, John said, his voice flat. Took everything. My business partner sided with her. My friends believe her lies. Even my own family thought I'd become abusive and unstable. It wasn't until years later that I found evidence she'd been planning it from the start. Why didn't you fight back? I tried, but she had better lawyers, more money, and the sympathy vote. A pretty woman crying on the stand beats a man's protests every time. John looked at Milton with hollow eyes. I've rebuilt my life, but it's not the same. She took more than money. She took my ability to trust anyone. Milton felt that familiar cold anger. John, we're going to stop them. All of them. But I need you to testify about what Candace did. Will it matter? Yes. Because this time we have evidence. This time, we're not fighting alone. By mid-December, the web was tightening. Jack had narrowed the list of potential Athenas down to 3 family court judges. Hal was building a civil RICO case against the network, arguing they constituted an organized criminal enterprise. Shane had provided funding for private investigators to dig into each woman's background. And Randy was becoming stronger. He'd moved out of the mansion and into an apartment, started therapy, and was rebuilding his business with help from loyal employees who'd never trusted Melissa. But Melissa and her father weren't going quietly. Calvin Clayton used his connections to launch investigations into Milton's construction business, looking for violations or improprieties. He filed motions to have the evidence thrown out, claiming it was obtained illegally. He hired a PR firm to paint Randy and Milton as vindictive, abusive men trying to destroy an innocent woman. The pressure was immense. Milton found himself under scrutiny from regulatory agencies, his taxes audited, his business permits questioned. Randy received threats on social media, his company's reputation taking hit after hit. They're trying to break us, Randy said one evening, sitting in Milton's kitchen looking exhausted. Maybe we should just settle, end this quietly. Milton set down his coffee cup. Son, let me tell you something about building. You know what happens when you use cheap materials to save money? The structure looks fine for a while, but eventually it collapses. Maybe not right away, but inevitably. I don't understand. Melissa and her network are a cheap, rotten structure. They've gotten away with it because most people settle, most people give up. But we're not going to. We're going to expose every beam, every wire, every corrupt piece of that structure until it all comes down. Even if it costs us everything. Even then, because the alternative is letting them do this to someone else. Your mother taught me that sometimes you have to stand up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Randy nodded slowly, and Milton saw Dorothy's strength in his son's eyes. Okay, we keep fighting. 2 days before Christmas, Jack called with the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. I found her, he said. I found Athena. Chapter 7. The architect revealed. Judge Sharon Harrison's chambers were in the Hartford County Courthouse, a granite building that represented authority and justice. At 43, Sharon was considered a rising star in the Connecticut legal world, fair, intelligent, and unimpeachable in her rulings. Or so everyone thought. Are you absolutely certain? Milton asked Jack for the third time. They were in Jack's office, staring at the evidence that had taken 6 weeks to compile. Sharon Harrison's digital fingerprints were all over the Phoenix Rising Forum. She was Athena, the mastermind who'd been orchestrating the fraud network for at least 5 years. I'm certain, Jack said. Gustavo traced her posts through metadata analysis. She made a mistake 2 years ago, posted from her personal laptop instead of through the usual proxies. From there, we built the profile. The legal terminology she uses, the cases she references, even her writing style, it all matches. Tanner leaned back in his chair, whistling low. A family court judge running a criminal conspiracy. This is career-ending for a lot of people. Maybe prison time. How did she recruit them? Randy asked. Jack pulled up transcripts of forum conversations. She didn't recruit most of them. They found each other. But Sharon provided the structure, the expertise, the legal protection. Look at this thread from 3 years ago. He highlighted a conversation where Athena, Sharon, advised a woman on how to manipulate custody evaluations, which lawyers to use, how to present evidence to maximize impact. The advice was sophisticated, detailed, and clearly from someone with inside knowledge. She's been manipulating her own court cases too, Jack continued. I cross-referenced her rulings with known network members. In 7 cases over the past 5 years, Sharon presided over divorces involving Phoenix Rising women. In every single case, the woman got the favorable ruling, the man got destroyed, and the evidence of fraud was ignored or suppressed. Milton felt the full weight of the corruption. This wasn't just individual women committing crimes. It was systemic manipulation of the justice system itself. Or do we take her down? Shane McDowell asked. He'd driven up from Stanford when he heard about the discovery. Carefully, Hal said. We can't just accuse a sitting judge of running a criminal network. We need absolute proof, and we need to bring it to the right people. The state attorney general, the Judicial Review Board, maybe even the FBI. We have the forum posts, Jack said. We have her digital trail. We have the pattern of rulings. We have testimony from victims. That's a strong case. But she'll have defenses Hal countered. She'll claim the account was hacked, that someone impersonated her, that the correlation in her rulings is coincidental. We need something irrefutable. Milton had been quiet, thinking, we need her to incriminate herself. On record, undeniable. Ow! We set a trap. The plan took shape over the next week. They would use Melissa to get to Sharon. Melissa was desperate, facing criminal charges, her reputation in tatters, her marriage dissolving. She'd turn her network for help, and ultimately, she'd turn to Athena. We need to make Melissa feel like she's losing, Milton explained. Right now, she thinks her father's connections will save her. We need to take that away. Shane had the solution. I've been talking to some of Calvin Clayton's former clients. Turns out, several of them are unhappy with how he handled their cases. With the right pressure, they might be willing to file ethics complaints. And if Calvin's license is threatened, Randy added, Melissa loses her main protection. They executed the plan methodically. Shane's contacts filed 3 separate ethics complaints against Calvin Clayton, citing mishandling of funds, conflicts of interest, and inappropriate conduct. The Connecticut Bar Association launched an investigation. Simultaneously, Hal filed new motions in Randy's divorce case, presenting evidence that Melissa had committed perjury in her initial filings. The judge, not Sharon Harrison, issued a preliminary ruling that looked bad for Melissa. She's panicking, Jack reported a week later. I've been monitoring the Phoenix Rising Forum. Melissa posted yesterday, asking for emergency help. She's scared the criminal case is going to stick. Has Athena, has Sharon, responded? Not yet, but she will. This is exactly the kind of crisis that would require her personal attention. They waited. Milton spent the time preparing the final pieces of the puzzle. He worked with FBI agent Kurt Osborne, whom he'd met during the construction of a federal building years ago. Kurt had been quietly investigating financial fraud in family court cases and was very interested in the Phoenix Rising network. If we can catch Sharon Harrison conspiring to obstruct justice or commit fraud, Kurt said, we can bring federal charges. But we need her on tape, clearly engaged in criminal activity. We'll get it, Milton promised. 2 days later, Jack's monitoring software picked up a private message from Athena to Melissa. Meet me at the usual place. Thursday, 8 p.m. Come alone. The usual place turned out to be a high-end hotel bar in West Hartford, neutral territory where a judge and a defendant could meet without raising immediate suspicions. Jack set up surveillance. Hidden cameras, directional microphones, the full technical package. Milton, Randy, Shane, and Hal watched from a van parked outside, while FBI agents waited in unmarked cars nearby. At 8:03 p.m., Melissa arrived, looking haggard despite her designer clothes. She ordered a martini and waited, her leg bouncing nervously. Sharon Harrison entered at 8:15, dressed casually in slacks and a blazer. She bought a glass of wine and sat at Melissa's table, her body language casual but controlled. Through the microphone, her voice came clear. You're making mistakes, Melissa. Panicking. I taught you better than this. They have everything, Melissa hissed. The bank records, the emails, all of it. My father's going to lose his license, and I'm going to prison. Only if you let them break you. Sharon sipped her wine. Listen carefully. Here's what you're going to do. What followed was 15 minutes of Sharon Harrison providing detailed instructions on how to destroy evidence, suborn perjury, and manipulate the legal system. She told Melissa which witnesses to intimidate, which documents to alter, how to claim attorney-client privilege to protect certain communications. I can help from the bench, Sharon said, but you need to get your case moved to my court. File a motion citing bias in your current judge. My clerk will make sure I get the assignment. That's judicial manipulation, Melissa said. It's survival, and you'll do it if you want to avoid prison. Sharon leaned forward. You're not the first member of our network to face this situation, and you won't be the last. But no one has gone to jail yet, and no one will as long as they follow my instructions. Melissa nodded, desperate hope flooding her face. Good, Sharon said. Now, there's the matter of my fee. In the van, Milton looked at FBI agent Kurt Osborne. Is that enough? Kurt was smiling grimly. That's enough to end her career and start a federal investigation into every case she's touched. Let's move. The FBI agents entered the bar smoothly, professionally. Sharon Harrison looked up in confusion as they approached her table. Then her face went white as Kurt showed his badge. Judge Sharon Harrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice, wire fraud, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. Melissa tried to run, but was stopped by another agent. The bar erupted in chaos as other patrons realized what was happening. Milton watched through the van's window as Sharon Harrison, Athena, the architect of so much pain, was let out in handcuffs. Her mask of authority had shattered, revealing the calculating criminal beneath. It's not over, Jack said quietly. There's still 12 other women in the network. No, Milton replied, but it's the beginning of the end. Chapter 8. The Dominoes Fall. The arrest of Judge Sharon Harrison made national news. A sitting family court judge running a criminal conspiracy. It was the kind of scandal that destroyed careers and institutions. Within 48 hours, the Connecticut Attorney General's office announced a comprehensive investigation into every case Sharon had presided over in the past decade. The Phoenix Rising Forum went dark immediately, but Jack had already downloaded the entire archive. The evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of posts detailing frauds, manufactured abuse claims, manipulated court cases. The women in the network scrambled to delete their digital footprints, but it was too late. 12 women, Hal Tanner said, spreading the files across the conference table in his office. All connected to Sharon Harrison, all using the same methods. Milton studied the faces. Melissa, Tracy Cooley, Candace Church, who destroyed John Simpson. Women with different names, but identical patterns of behavior. Charm, manipulation, fraud, destruction. What's our strategy? Shane asked. We go after them systematically, Howe replied. The FBI is handling Sharon's case, but we can file civil suits against each of these women. RICO charges organized criminal enterprise. We argue they conspired to commit fraud, share the evidence, and let the courts sort it out. Randy looked troubled. Some of them might have been victims themselves at some point, pushed into this by desperation or abuse. Possibly, Milton acknowledged. But they made choices. They chose to hurt people, to destroy lives. Whatever their backstory, they're responsible for their actions. The first domino fell 3 days later. Tracy Cooley, facing evidence of her fraud scheme against Shane McDowell, attempted to flee the state. She was arrested at JFK Airport with $200,000 in cash and a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. The arrest made headlines, and suddenly the story had legs. A network of wealthy women scamming men, enabled by a corrupt judge. The second domino was Candace Church. John Simpson filed criminal charges, and the district attorney, motivated by the publicity and the clear evidence, agreed to prosecute. Candace's attorney tried to claim she was being persecuted for being a divorced woman, but the forum posts were damning. She'd bragged about destroying John, shared tactics with other members, celebrated her success. The third domino was Melissa. With Sharon Harrison arrested and unable to manipulate the court, with the evidence of fraud overwhelming, with her father Calvin Clayton suspended from practicing law, she had no defenses left. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. Melissa would plead guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy, testify against the other network members, and serve 5 years in federal prison. She's going to prison, Randy said quietly when Howe called with the news. Milton looked at his son. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Part of me is glad she's being punished. Part of me just feels empty. I loved her, Dad. Or I thought I did. You loved who you thought she was. That person never existed. I know, but it still hurts. They sat in silence for a moment before Randy spoke again. Do you think I'll ever be able to trust someone again? Milton thought of Dorothy, of their 40 years together built on honesty and respect. You will, but maybe you'll be more careful. Maybe you'll look for someone who shares your values instead of someone who just looks good on paper. As the other women in the network were arrested or fled, a bigger picture emerged. Sharon Harrison's conspiracy had been operating for 7 years, not 5. It had defrauded men of an estimated $30 million. Lives had been destroyed. 3 men had committed suicide after being ruined by network members. Families had been torn apart. Children had been used as weapons in custody battles. The scope of the damage was staggering. Milton found himself becoming the public face of the victims. News organizations wanted to interview him to understand how he'd uncovered the conspiracy. He gave interviews carefully, always focusing on protecting future victims rather than revenge. These women exploited the family court system, he told a CBS reporter. They weaponized abuse claims, manipulated good people's desire to believe survivors, and destroyed lives for profit. We need reforms, better oversight of family court judges, more stringent evidence requirements, protection for defendants against false accusations. The interview went viral. Suddenly, Milton Wells, a 68-year-old retired construction foreman, was being invited to speak at legal conferences, to consult with legislators on family court reform, to join advocacy groups. You're famous, Jack said with amusement, watching Milton's interview play on the news. I'm inconvenient, Milton corrected. People don't like being reminded that the system can be corrupted, that judges can be criminals, that pretty, well-spoken women can be predators. You're changing the conversation, though. That matters. It did matter. Within 3 months, Connecticut passed new legislation requiring external oversight of family court cases involving fraud allegations. Other states began similar reforms. The family court system, long criticized for bias, was forced to confront its vulnerabilities. But not everyone was happy with Milton's crusade. He received death threats from women's advocacy groups who claimed he was undermining legitimate abuse survivors. He was doxxed online, his address and phone number published. Someone vandalized his truck with spray paint. Woman hater. The backlash was fierce, but Milton had faced worse. He'd worked construction for 40 years, dealt with corrupt contractors, dangerous sites, and people trying to kill him. Angry online messages didn't compare. Let them be angry, he told Randy. Truth doesn't become less true because it's unpopular. By spring, 11 of the 12 network members had been arrested or were negotiating plea deals. The 12th, a woman named Jasmine Reed who'd gone into hiding, was still at large but had become irrelevant. Sharon Harrison was facing 40 years in federal prison. Calvin Clayton had been disbarred and was under investigation for his role in enabling his daughter's crimes. The civil suits Milton, Shane, and the other victims had filed were proceeding. Recovery of stolen assets, damages for emotional harm, RICO penalties. The women who'd thought themselves untouchable were being dismantled piece by piece. "We won," Randy said one evening, sitting in Milton's garage as his father worked on a new project, a chest of drawers for a young couple buying their first home. "We survived," Milton corrected. "Winning implies there was a competition. This was just justice. It feels bigger than that. You changed things, Dad. Not just for us, but for everyone." Milton set down his hammer and looked at his son. Randy had grown over the past months, harder in some ways, but stronger too. The naive man who'd married Melissa was gone, replaced by someone more careful, more aware, more resilient. "Your mother will be proud of you," Milton said. "You could have given up, could have let Melissa destroy you. Instead, you fought back. Because you taught me how. You and Mom." They worked together in comfortable silence, the smell of sawdust and the sound of tools filling the garage. Outside, spring was arriving, trees budding, birds returning, the world renewing itself after winter. Milton thought about promises kept and justice served, about building things that lasted and tearing down things that were rotten, about protecting family and punishing those who would harm them. Dorothy would have approved. Chapter 9. New Foundations. The trial of Sharon Harrison began in late May, nearly 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner that had started everything. The federal courthouse in New Haven was packed with media, victims, and observers curious to see a judge brought down. Milton sat in the gallery with Randy, Shane, John Simpson, and a dozen other men whose lives had been affected by the Phoenix Rising Network. They were united now, not by victimhood, but by survival and determination. The prosecution's case was devastating. They presented the forum archives, showing Sharon's posts as Athena detailing how to manipulate court cases, destroy evidence, and create false narratives. They played the recording from a hotel bar where Sharon had advised Melissa on obstruction of justice. They brought witnesses, women who'd left the network in disgust, court clerks who'd noticed irregularities, forensic accountants who'd traced the money. Sharon's defense tried to claim she'd been investigating the network, that her posts were part of an undercover operation. But they couldn't explain why she'd never reported it to authorities, why she'd taken money from network members, why she'd ruled in their favor in her courtroom. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sharon Harrison was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. The judge's comments were scathing. "You betrayed the public trust, corrupted the justice system, and enabled the destruction of innocent people's lives. Your actions have undermined confidence in the judiciary and harmed countless families. You deserve no mercy." As Sharon was led away, Milton felt the final piece of tension release from his shoulders. It was over, truly over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Milton gave a brief statement. Justice was served today, not just for the direct victims of Judge Harrison's crimes, but for everyone who relies on the family court system. We must remain vigilant to ensure this never happens again. Randy stood beside him, and Milton was proud of the strength he saw in his son's face. The aftermath continued for months. Melissa served her sentence quietly, her father disgraced and powerless to help her. Tracy Cooley and the other network members faced their own reckonings. Prison time, financial ruin, public shame. The systems they'd exploited were reformed, made stronger, more resistant to corruption. But more importantly, the victims healed. Randy rebuilt his business, this time surrounded by people he trusted. He started dating again, carefully, with eyes wide open, and found a woman named Pearl Scott who worked as a teacher and had no interest in his money. They took things slow, built a foundation of friendship before romance. Shane McDowell created a foundation to help men dealing with false accusations in family court, providing legal resources and support. He recruited Milton to the board, using his story to help others. John Simpson finally got closure, testifying at Candace Church's trial and watching her receive a 12-year sentence. He started writing a book about his experience, hoping to help other survivors. And Milton returned to his workshop, building things with his hands and finding peace in the simple act of creation. But he also traveled, speaking at conferences about family court reform, consulting with legislators, helping other victims find their voice. 1 year after that Thanksgiving, Milton hosted a new dinner at his home. Not 30 people in designer clothes drinking expensive wine, but a dozen friends gathered around his kitchen table eating turkey he'd cooked himself. Randy and Pearl were there. Shane and his new girlfriend. John Simpson and his fiancée. Jack Reed and his wife. Judge Albert McCoy. Others who'd been part of the fight. As they gathered around the table, Milton raised his glass of beer. "I want to propose a toast," he said. "To absent friends, especially Dorothy, who taught me that fighting for what's right is always worth it. And to all of you, who proved that good people standing together could defeat evil, no matter how well-dressed or well-connected it is." They drank and then began the meal. Not a performance of wealth or status, but a genuine celebration of survival and friendship. Later, as Milton cleaned up while others lingered over dessert, Randy joined him in the kitchen. "Dad, I've been thinking about what happened. About Melissa, about all of it. Yeah, I was angry for a long time. Hurt, betrayed. But I'm starting to see it differently now. She tried to destroy me, but instead, she made me stronger. She tried to take everything, but she gave me something more valuable, the ability to recognize what really matters." Milton dried his hands on a dish towel. "What matters?" Randy gestured toward the living room, where their friends were laughing and talking. "This, real connections. People who care about you for who you are, not what you can give them. Family, not just blood, but chosen family. Integrity, the kind of strength you showed me by never giving up, never compromising your values. Your mother taught me that. I'm just passing it on. Well, I'm listening now. Really listening." Randy paused. "I want to be like you, Dad. Not just successful in business, but successful in life. Building things that matter, protecting people who need it, standing up to bullies no matter how powerful they are." Milton pulled his son into a hug. "You already are like that. You just needed to believe in yourself." As the evening wound down and guests departed, Milton stood on his porch watching the stars emerge. The air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and possibility. He thought about the journey from that Thanksgiving disaster to this moment of peace. About how sometimes you had to tear down what was rotten before you could build something strong. About promises kept and justice served. His phone buzzed. A text from a stranger. "Mr. Wells, my name is Lyle Booker. I'm facing false accusations from my wife and her attorney. I read about your case, and I'm hoping you can help me fight back. I don't know where else to turn." Milton looked at the message for a long moment. He could ignore it, could say he'd done enough, had earned his peace. But that wasn't who he was. That wasn't who Dorothy had married, or who she'd made him promise to be. He typed a response, "Call me tomorrow. We'll talk. You're not alone in this." Because that was the real lesson of the past year. Evil flourished when good people stayed silent, when victims suffered alone, when corruption went unchallenged. But when people stood together, when they refused to be broken, when they fought back with intelligence and determination, then even the strongest corrupt foundations could be brought down. Milton went back inside, locking the door behind him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to keep his promise to Dorothy. But tonight he had peace. He had his son back, whole and strong. He had friends who'd stood beside him. He had the satisfaction of knowing that Melissa and her co-conspirators were facing justice, that the system was being reformed, that future victims would have better protection. In his workshop, he looked at his current project, a cradle he was building for a young couple expecting their first child. Simple, sturdy, built to last. the kind of thing that would be passed down through generations, carrying love forward through time. That's what mattered. Not revenge, not destruction, but creation. Building things, relationships, families, communities strong enough to withstand storms. Milton ran his hand over the smooth wood, feeling the grain, the strength, the potential. And he smiled. He'd kept his promise. He'd protected his son. He'd fought the good fight. And he'd won. Not because he was cruel or vindictive. Not because he'd destroyed his enemies with rage and hatred. But because he'd been smart, patient, strategic. Because he'd built a case as solid as any foundation he'd ever poured. Because he'd stood firm when everything pushed him to compromise. That was the real victory. Not Melissa's prison sentence, or Sharon's downfall, or the network's destruction, though those mattered. The real victory was maintaining integrity while fighting monsters. Staying human while battling the inhuman. Building while others destroyed. Milton Wells, 68-year-old retired construction foreman, had faced down a criminal conspiracy backed by money, power, and corruption. And he'd won by being exactly what he'd always been. A good man who kept his promises, protected his family, and built things meant to last. As he turned off the workshop lights and headed to bed, Milton thought of Dorothy one more time. He could almost hear her voice, proud and loving. Well done, Milton. Well done. And somewhere, in whatever waited beyond this life, he hoped she was smiling. The end. Epilogue. 2 years later. The foundation Milton had helped create, the Family Court Justice Initiative, was hosting its second annual conference. Milton stood backstage, adjusting his tie. He'd finally gotten used to wearing them regularly, and preparing to give the keynote address. Randy appeared beside him, looking confident in his suit. You ready, Dad? As I'll ever be. How many people? About 500. Lawyers, advocates, legislators, victims. Your speech last year started a movement. This year, you're cementing it. Milton shook his head in amazement. 2 years ago, he'd been a retired foreman working in his garage. Now he was testifying before Congress, consulting on legal reform, helping rewrite family court procedures across multiple states. I still can't believe this is my life. Believe it. You've helped 63 men successfully defend against false accusations. You've been part of reforming family court procedures in 7 states. You've trained over 200 lawyers on recognizing fraud patterns. Dad, you're changing the system. The introduction began, and Milton walked out to applause. He looked out at the crowd, survivors, advocates, allies, and saw hope where there had once been despair. 2 years ago, he began, I thought my job was to protect my son. I thought if I could save Randy from a predatory woman and her corrupt network, I'd have done enough. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I was wrong. My job wasn't just to save one person. It was to fix a broken system that had enabled predators to flourish. My job was to stand up and say, no more. No more corrupt judges. No more weaponized abuse claims. No more good people destroyed by those who game the system. The crowd was silent, attentive. We've made progress, but we're not done. There are still people suffering under false accusations. Still corrupt actors in the system. Still reforms needed. And that's why we're here, not to rest on our victories, but to keep building. Keep fighting. Keep making the system better. He looked down at the front row, where Randy sat beside Pearl, his fiancée now, wedding planned for next spring. Where Shane and John sat with their new partners. Where Jack Reed sat with his investigative team. Where Judge Albert McCoy sat, having retired but still advocating for reform. A wise woman once told me that good people staying silent allows evil to flourish. My wife Dorothy taught me to speak up, to fight back, to never compromise on what's right. And I'm here to tell you, we are speaking up, we are fighting back, and we are winning. The applause was thunderous. Milton spoke for 40 minutes, detailing reforms, celebrating victories, outlining future challenges. When he finished, the standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Backstage afterward, a young man approached, maybe 25, nervous but determined. Mr. Wells? I'm Charlie Drake. I wanted to thank you. My father was one of the men who didn't survive false accusations. He took his own life 3 years ago. But because of what you've done, because of the reforms and the advocacy, I don't think that would happen to him today. You saved families like mine from that pain. Milton gripped the young man's hand, feeling the weight of what had been lost and what had been preserved. I'm sorry about your father, Charlie. I wish I could have helped him. You're helping people like him now. That's what matters. As the conference continued, Milton found a quiet moment alone. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo of Dorothy, taken 40 years ago on their wedding day. Young, beautiful, fierce with love. We did it, Dottie, he whispered. We kept our promise. We protected our family, and then some. And for just a moment, he swore he could feel her hand on his shoulder, proud and warm. Milton Wells had started as a construction foreman who built houses. He'd become something more, a builder of justice, a protector of the innocent, a force for reform. He'd torn down corruption and built something better in its place. And he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.